If you're a state or local elected, who are largely our audience, and they're going to think about what you just said, can you drill a little deeper on like what advice would you give to them when they're thinking about designing something, when they're thinking about systems, like how can they make it easier for people to interact with government?
So there's really four things that we advise, and this works at any level of government. The first thing is and actually let me first contextualize it, because you did bring up this issue of passing laws but not really getting the output or the outcome that the public in your constituency is expecting.
Yeah.
One example, I recently moved to the DC area, but from California, we have passed over 100 bills to increase housing. Housing has not meaningfully budged, right?
Right.
So of course, people feel frustrated. Of course, people are now looking to the person who says, yes, but I can fix this, right? So if you want a government that can actually achieve its policy goals, and that's sort of the framework I'm working with, you need to be able to hire the right people and fire the wrong ones. In many states and cities and counties, that is going to involve some sort of civil service reform. It may not be statutory reform, and it may be getting in there and understanding, why do we have San Francisco, I think recently was a 250-day hiring, an average.
That's just insane.
250 days to hire. Well,
Right.
yes, you're not achieving your policy goals because you don't have the people you need. A whole bunch of other thing in there, like how are you assessing people for their skills? Like, how are you managing your workforce? Are you able to fire underperformers? This is a big deal for Dems, who are, we're obviously very proud of our relationships with the unions, but we really need to have it is part of the compact we have with the American public that we're going to spend those taxpayer dollars well. We're going to be able to manage that workforce. So that's the first thing. The second thing is reducing procedural bloat. So one of the things to add to that discussion is that we are now at a point where we have tools to do this that didn't exist before.
Right.
I am not a technology optimist. I don't think tech solves all problems, but LLMs actually are like great at going around, and you can feed just tons and tons of statutes and regs and stuff into them, and they can help you figure out what no longer needs to be on the books. So there's just not all that volume of regulation you have to wade through. We partner with the Stanford Reg Lab, some great folks who have these custom LLMs. They're very smart. They're very careful about this. They have the appropriate guardrails, right? But they've gone and looked at, they found dozens of boards and commissions in San Francisco that no one even knew existed anymore. Let's get those off the books. But they can also help with things that are going to probably be a little bit more controversial, like, what steps can we take out in this process, et cetera. Another good example of that, unemployment insurance. In the state of New Jersey, it's going to be different in each state, 7,119 pages of active regulations.
Oh my gosh.
Of course, we can't scale those systems up in times of high need and scale them back down. They're too fragile, right? They're too complex. We can now go through and say what in there is de minimis, what in there is conflicting, what in there is just vestigial. How can we, create a set of rules and regulations that should run unemployment insurance in 2025? Like, how would you simplify this that just doesn't have the 90 years of legacy that's accreted and accrued? It would be impossible. It's very, very hard to do that without the help of LLMs. But we do now have those tools. So let's do that work. If you're listening to this and you're interested in having us come help, reach out to me, because we're looking for jurisdictions to show how this works in, and we have a couple we can talk about soon.
Wonderful.
The third thing is investing in digital and data infrastructure. To do any of these things, we have to see what we're able to do. We have to have the tech talent and the design talent to build these interfaces to government that people like using. They can make smart decisions for you about, do you need 212 questions on your SNAP form? No, you don't. Let's design something that really works for people, and let's have the back end that delivers. And then the last piece that I think is the most abstract, but probably the most important, is closing the loop between policy and implementation. So right now, it's sort of works in a sort of a waterfall method. You pass a law or policy, and it gets handed off to successive layers of a bureaucracy. By the time it's actually being implemented on the ground, by folks that are so distant from the folks who passed the law, a game of telephone has occurred. They don't quite know like what the real intention was. It's been burdened with lots of procedure. It's now more about the process than it is about the outcome. And they're not able to sort of loop back and say, is what we're doing what you intended? Is this working? Are we getting the results that we were hoping to get? And we have to really fundamentally think differently about the relationship between the executive and legislative branches
Mm.
in order to build these tight feedback loops so that by the time you're actually, hitting the ground, we kind of have tested things, we know what works, and we're confident that we're going to get there, and that we keep having those feedback loops all the way along. But right now, most legislators are like, I passed the law, it's someone else's job now. um, I'm moving on to the next piece of legislation, or the next bill that I want to introduce. That's a really big mind shift, but I would absolutely encourage anybody here in the legislative branch to shift their thinking. I think your voters will actually reward you for it, for caring more about the outcome than the bill. And
Yeah.
that is going to mean you spend your days and your staff spend your days on fundamentally different things, but it will pay off.